There is a reason for everything, we usually say. But this reason does not exist in some transcendent metaphysical realm, guiding all our actions and governing all past, present, or future events. This so-called reason is something immanent. It is material, concrete, corporeal, strange, unfinished, interruptive, and unplanned. This tendency of philosophical inquiry to reify ideals at the expense of concrete life is something that Christine Korsgaard, in her work The Sources of Normativity, have powerfully identified, and I quote, "If all things are striving for perfection, why do they fail? What holds them back? What could?" Plato, I believe, thought that the problem was in us, that sense experience itself was a kind of illusion, or perhaps that the badness of the world was an illusion produced by the perspective of sense. And because the problem was in us, he put forth in the Phaedrus a doctrine of the fall, or the fall of man, which we are more familiar with in the Christian context. Aristotle didn't give an explanation either, but he gave the problem a name, hyle, or matter. The form of thing is its perfection, but if a thing doesn't reach its form, or perfect form, then ultimately it is because there is some reluctance, some recalcitrance, some resistance in its matter. The matter refuses, so to speak, to take the form, unquote. This was the same painful reminder that Emmanuel Levinas and Theodore Adorno gave us in their critique of metaphysics and the consequent endorsement of ethics. Levinas, in his Ethics as First Philosophy, asserts, "The question par excellence, or the question of philosophy, is not why being rather than nothing, but how being justifies itself." He asked the normative question, is my being justified? Is not my existence already the usurpation of somebody else's place? As we say in Filipino, bakit ako? Why me? Both in the positive and negative sense. So he explains his question, and I quote, "One has to respond to one's right to be, not by referring to some abstract and anonymous law or judicial entity, but because of one's fear for the other. A fear for all the violence and murder my existing might generate, in spite of its conscious and intentional innocence. A fear which reaches back past my self-consciousness, in spite of whatever moves are made towards a bonne conscience or good conscience, by a pure perseverance in being. It is the fear of occupying someone else's place with the da, or there-ness of my da sign, my being there." He further adds, "My being in the world, or my place in the sun, my being at home, have these not also been the usurpation of spaces belonging to the other man, whom I have already oppressed or starved, or driven out into a third world? Are they not acts of repulsing, excluding, exiling, stripping, killing?" Unquote. Meanwhile, in Adorno, we find metaphysics as having been transformed in its innermost motives by the horrors of totalitarianism. Adorno writes, "Metaphysics has been changed in its innermost motives. I could, if you like, give this a moral philosophical twist and say that Hitler has placed a new imperative on us, that quite simply, Auschwitz should not be repeated, and that nothing like it should ever exist again." Unquote. This is the ethical turn in philosophy. That is the shift from the metaphysical to the corporeal. Ethics is not the realization of the transcendent idea. Ethics is the recognition of material bodily existence itself. As he asserts, the true basis of morality is to be found in bodily feeling, in identification with the unbearable pain. The metaphysical principle of the injunction that thou shalt not inflict pain or thou shalt not kill finds its justification only in the recourse to material reality, to corporeal, physical reality, and not to its opposite pole, the pure idea. What Professor Nelson presented to us today is exactly this reiteration of material corporeal existence as the foundation of morality or ethics and political and historical life. As such, it constitutes the locus of human dignity and human rights. Dignity is not founded in autonomy like in Kant, nor perseverance in being like in Heidegger, nor is bestowed by God like in Christianity or the forms like in Plato. Dignity and rights are founded in bodily existence itself. I respect you and I need to be ethical to you because I can kill you. The only way I can justify my existence is by being ethical towards you. If temporal or historical life was founded in metaphysics, lived according to some metaphysical utopian ideal that is absolute, certain, and complete, the materialist reading of historical life reverses this and proposes the ethical material rather than the metaphysical ideal. That is, the active realization of human dignity via the transcendence of the material conditions that obstruct its actualization: inequality, injustice, human suffering. It is a form of transcendence that does not appeal to some transcendent entity or principle, simply waiting for the salvation to come. It is a form of transcendence that actively challenges inhuman conditions rather than justifying suffering and inequality. This kind of resistance to the metaphysical justification of inhumanity is what we can derive from Levinas and Adorno, but also from Ernst Bloch, who at the same time reminds us that if we are Marxists, we must believe in the principle of hope, that one does not have the right to be a pessimist. As temporal beings, we must find in us the courage to trust the unfinished and be open towards the unplanned and strange, and that, as Richard Rorty describes hope, the ability to believe that the future will be unspecifiably different from and unspecifiably freer than the past. For hope is the condition for growth. This ability to have hope in the honesty, straightforwardness, nakedness, destitution, and recalcitrance of matter and nature, and not see it as a problem like Plato and Aristotle did, is what's absent in our metaphysical conception of both history and politics. The motor that drives the movement of history and politics is not the human melancholy over a certain impending death and the seizure of the present in lieu of this end, as stated by Heidegger, that we are beings towards death. Nor is it the unfolding or coming to being of some transcendent principle existing in some atemporal realm, as in Hegel or Plato. It is the courageous, hopeful optimism for the future realization of human dignity and rights as grounded in the human condition of mortality, of body and flesh, as in Bloch and Levinas. This prophetic hope and dream about the imminent possibility of actualizing human dignity not beyond matter but in and through matter is the driver of temporal life and historical struggle. And as philosophers, social scientists, and historians, maybe we can say with Badiou, even if he criticizes Levinas, that it is our business to be optimistic. He argues that if you are pessimistic, finally there is no use of yourself. Because to be pessimistic, there is no necessity to be a philosopher, a social scientist, or historian. The situation suffices. The world only offers an opportunity to yield. And so, to be able to say something useful for the people, we must have some hope to transform the world and go to the direction of a better world, if it is possible. So, by way of ending and clarifying these points, perhaps I just have two questions to the professor. Should we interpret hope as a product of subjective will or some mode of temporal human existence? Or is it, in a way, an objective condition of history, a general law governing history? If it is a product of subjective will, is it not endorsing a strictly anthropocentric view of time and history? And that we are once again superimposing our subjective will to the objectivity and necessity of history. But on the other hand, if hope is an objective condition in historical research, for instance, do we now have to read all histories as the unfurling of different forms of resistances to suffering and inequality, and the struggle to realize human dignity? And that indeed, This prophetic hope and dream about the imminent possibility of actualizing human dignity, not beyond matter, but in and through matter, is the driver of temporal life and historical struggle. And my second question is coming from Badiou. What do you think of the Badiouan critique of the ethics of difference in human rights that reduces human identity to its animal substructure, to the suffering beast, emaciated, dying body? Thank you very much.